Hi everyone. In this demo video, we are going to demonstrate how we can make use of Ansible Tower automation to drive the installation of the OpenShift container platform 4.4 release on bare metal nodes. So before we start to drive the automation, we need to make sure that the user provision infrastructure is set up properly. Right, one of those few things that you need to look up for will be things like DHCP configurations, right? The load balancers setup, and the DNS setup, right? One of the blogs that I like to refer to a lot is this one, right? It talks about how we can set up the DNS for the OpenShift 4 cluster. Of course, one of the first considerations that we need to take is this cluster ID. The cluster ID uniquely identifies each of the cluster inside the domain. Right? It's also part of the cluster FQDN. Um, as mentioned over here, the combination of cluster ID and domain creates this cluster domain. Right? So in this case, the example is that the cluster ID is OpenShift 4, and the domain is example.com. So when we run this the dig command, right, we should be able to get all the required IPs that we have set up for this particular cluster, right? It's important that we set up the DNS entries properly so that we will be able to set up this deployment without any issues, right? So you can see these are the basic stuff that they have. In our case, right, I am actually going to set up just a 3-node clusters inside the OpenShift container platform with no workers. The main reason for doing that is just to make sure that we have a smaller, more resource efficient clusters that we can use for deployment, development, and testing purpose. Right, you can of course deploy a full-fledged cluster as shown in the example over here, right, with 2 worker nodes and 3 masters. Um, see, other than the master entries, right, just make sure that the XCD entries are set up properly as well, and the reverse DNS, make sure that all those things are set up, right. This is the API dot cluster domain as well as the API dash int, right, for the cluster domain. This one is important, right. The wildcard DNS entry, right, we need it in place, and this as well, right? The XCD server SSL. So in my case, right, I'm actually going to use the Kickstart server to set up the RHEL core OS, right, on the bare metal nodes. It's also important, right, that we have the load balancer set up properly. Right, it is needed to do the front end of the APIs, right? And as mentioned over here, right, you need this load balancer to front end the APIs, both internal and external, as well as the OpenShift router. We are using HA proxy in our example, right? You can use any load balancer as appropriate. It's up to you. Right, so this is an example on how you can set up the HA proxy configurations. Um, in my case, right, because I'm using a 3-node cluster, I wouldn't have the worker nodes over here, right? It will be replaced by my master node, basically, right? Since my master node is also my worker node in this case. So once we have set up all these things, we can start to proceed with the deployment of the OpenShift cluster on bare metal, right? So all the instructions over here, you can always go through them, right? Like in this case, I'm running the 3-node cluster setup, as I mentioned earlier. What is going to happen next, right, is that I'm going to have a Bootstrap VM installed on my KVM host. I will use that to bootstrap and install, deploy, right, OCP on top of my bare metal nodes. The Bootstrap VM will be created over here, right? As you can see, this is my KVM host, right? This is the cockpit interface, right? It allows you to manage the virtual machines, right? and perform other system administration stuff on it. Cockpit is basically a server administration tool, right? It focuses on providing the user-friendly interface, right, for you to manage and administer servers. Right, in our case, I'm just going to use this, to showcase how Ansible is going to automatically set up the Bootstrap VM, right? Everything will be driven via the Ansible automation, and it will also start the kickstart. It will also start the Bootstrap process for the rest of the bare metal nodes, which I'm going to show you later on as well. So I'm going back into the dashboard of Ansible Tower, right? So you can see over here that this is the workflow that I am going to run in order to deploy this particular workflow. And to show you guys what is inside, you can see that I think it's a bit small. Basically, what we are doing is that we are creating the ignition files that is needed for the OCP cluster deployment. After that, we are basically going to use automation to drive the bootstrap of the bare metal for the core OS. And then after that, we are going to monitor the process of the deployment for OCP. And after that, we are going to clean up the Bootstrap VM upon success of the deployment of this environment, right? So before I proceed further, right, I just show you the bare metal that we have. So over here, we are using Intel bare metal nodes, right? I have 3 bare metals, right? 1, 0, 7, 0, 8, and 0, 9, right? Those are the ones that I have. So let me just log in. So this is my integrated BMC web console of the Intel servers. What we will do, right, is that we will look at the IKVM console, right? This is just so that we can get to the GUI of this, the console, I mean, of the bare metal nodes. So you can see that the bare metal is basically inside the BIOS screen, right? So Ansible is going to automatically do a reset on all these systems as part of the workflow so that it will start to do the Bixby boot. The same thing can be seen over here, right? We will just look at here. We can then so this is what you will see for the second bare metal, and then this is the third bare metal that we have. Right, so all of them are in the BIOS screen. So we are ready to start the deployment, right? So this is the cockpit UI of the KVM host. So we just need to hit the rocket button on the Ansible Tower UI. Right. You will see that survey form, this is what we call, right, in Ansible Tower terms, right, will show up. The information over here, of course, will be relating to how we can access the bare metal, right? The IPMI user, the password, the cluster ID, right? I'm calling it OCP cluster 2 over here. This is my core OS image. What installed directory I am going, right? Just to show you what I meant by that. Right, this is my OCP client server, right? Basically, I'm using this to do the deployment, right? You can see that this is my install directory that I mentioned, right? The OpenShift install packages have been downloaded as per the instructions, right? As inside our documentation. You need to follow that to go and get the client as well as the installer. So this is where the ignition files will be created. The information will then be transferred over to the web servers, right? Things like the Bootstrap injection, the master.ing file, those things will all be transferred over to the web server as part of the automation. So everything is driven automatically, right, from a tower perspective. The SSH keys, we are basically using the one for the user that we just saw, right? And then this is where the web server is going to house all the ignition files. So we're just going to confirm, right, that this is what we need, and then we will launch it. So you will see that all the informations that we have will come in as extra vars. And then we can look at what this is doing. It's basically creating a manifest, is sending all the, so you can see that we are cleaning up any manifest if we find anything, right? And then we are finding all the ing files, and then retrieving the pull secret, generating the install config YAML, right? We are creating the manifest, the ignition file, and then performing all these actions. The next thing that it does is that it basically goes and create the Bootstrap VM. So you can come over here, you will see that this gets created automatically, right, by automation. It basically does a round of Bootstrap. So you can see that this is the 10.10.10.95. It's where the web server is. It's housing the bootstrap.ing file. We are using instructions from there to perform the rest of the Bootstrap. So it will format the disk, and after that, finish the installation. So Ansible automation is basically driving this whole thing automatically. Right? You can see over here that it was actually waiting for the system to be bootstrapped, and after that, it ensures that the Bootstrap VM is in a running state, which is what we saw earlier. The next thing that it does is it actually goes and kickstart the bare metal nodes. So this thing is ongoing, and that we will see, for instance, right, that the 107 machine is automatically started by Ansible Tower. Right. So as part of the automation, Ansible actually sets the bare metal to start from the network device, right? So that it will automatically get Bootstrap or Pixie Boot by the Kickstart server in our case. So you can see that over here, the server is already in the login, right? The Bootstrap VM itself. If you want to look at what is going on over here, so we know that this is running at 10.10.10.132 IP, right? So I mean, you can see over here, of course, right? This guy is also going through the same kind of steps and procedures. The only difference is that it's running the master.ing, because this is going to be set up as our master node. So if you come over here, you will see that all these are being created, right? And then if you were to go into 10, 10, 10, 132, sorry. So we are inside the Bootstrap VM. You can look at the progress by typing this, right? It's rendering all the different manifests, as you can see over here, right? This is what the Bootstrap VM is actually doing. It's doing things like image pool. It's basically doing all the appropriate work that is needed to perform the actual Bootstrap itself, right? So we can just leave the logs running. So the server reboots. So the next thing, right, let's check out the automation logs. So now that the first server is rebooted, it will go and do the same thing on the second server. So this second server is here, right? So it goes through the same process as well. So 107, 108. The 108 is the second Bootstrap server that we have. just to show that the third one is still in the BIOS screen, right? You can see over here because we are basically waiting, right? I mean, you don't have to, right? It's just that what I'm doing is that I was giving it some form of a time difference before I start all these servers. You can run them in parallel, right? Obviously, it's just that in my demo, I just wanted to show that Ansible is able to also give a time difference, right, when we start to run all these processes. So this is 109. So you can see in the background, 107 is almost up. So this guy is going to go through a reboot. So you can see 107 is logged in as master 0. So 109 is the third bare metal server. Ansible has just issued the command, the instructions, right, to get the third bare metal node to go into reset and to boot from a network. So this server basically will then start the process, right, as it will all be driven by the Bootstrap VM that we have created on the KVM host. So you can see, right, that it's trying to get the configuration, right, /config/master. So again, it's almost up. We are waiting for the link to become ready. So ENO2 is my second NIC card that is used for doing Pixie boot. This server has two NICs. The ENO1 is mainly my management NIC card. So here we can see that it's master 1 login prompt, right? So we will just minimize this. We will wait for the last one. And obviously the Bootstrap process is completed, right? You can see from the Ansible screen that it basically says that it's all good. It will start to monitor, right, the Bootstrap process as well. So this is part of the workflow. So over here, if you were to go and look at you know, what's going on inside the Bootstrap VM, it's trying to go through the process, right? So you'll need to wait for a while before it's able to create all the required manifest. So this is 109. So we're just waiting for the link to be up. Okay, right. So you can see that it says master2 login prompt. So from this point onwards, right, all that we need to do is we will just have to wait for the Bootstrap VM, right, in this case, to go and continue with the rest of the Bootstrap process. We can see over here that Ansible Tower is constantly checking, right, on the flow, right, of this Bootstrap process itself. We will just have to wait for a while. So you can see that it has managed to create, right, the machine config. So it's starting to check the pod status after this. So you can see over here that the Bootstrap service is completed. So as seen over here, right? Ansible is able to capture the output, right? So you can see that the Bootstrap status is completed, and hence we will move on to the next stage, right? So we actually gave it a bit of time, right, just for the control plane to stabilize. After that, we will start to with the rest of the deployment, right? We will just be monitoring the process, and the cluster will be up after that. So it's going to take a while more. We are just going to fast forward some of this video. So the next thing that we are doing is that we are just printing the list of, just refresh, the nodes, right? So we can see that the OC get nodes command is returning that we have the master 0, 1, and 2 taking the role of master and worker, right? So it's now in ready state. We are adding a storage to the image registry, and then we'll wait for the rest of the OCP cluster to finish complete. I mean to be deployed, right? So one of those things that we can do, of course, is that we can come back here, right? We know that we can actually run commands over here, right? Then what we can do is we can wait and see where the status is for all the different cluster operator. So the entire system is installed using operators, right? I mean, and all this will correspond to what Ansible Tower is monitoring as well. Right, the main idea is that you don't have to do all these things yourself. Right, you can use automation tools like Ansible Tower to drive the entire deployment, including the what we showed, right, like creation of the ignition files, and all those other stuff. Okay, so you can see that the install is complete, right? So from here we can actually see how to access the console, right? So this is the endpoint. So then we will be using the kube admin user. We will need to check the password, right? Over here, this is the password. And we are in, right? So this is the cluster that we just deployed using automation, right? So then obviously the last step, right, that the workflow is doing is to go and destroy that. I'm sorry, the Bootstrap VM. So you can see over here that what it does is that it actually goes into the KVM host, right? It just shut it down, then undefined plus delete the QCOW image. So then if you were to go back to here, you will see that from the cockpit of the KVM host, you will no longer see that OCP cluster Bootstrap VM, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, this concludes the demo itself, right? It's just to show you guys that we can drive the entire deployment, right, using the guide by automating all the steps over here, and then using Ansible, right, to just go and deploy this thing. Thanks all for watching.